Good morning, Wham! How we doing? Well, welcome. We're going to learn about Jamestown, the first English colony. I know we already did Plymouth, the second first, but now we're doing the first second. And a lot of people do that actually as far as the importance, because of Thanksgiving and the religious freedom bit, which is important. The Pilgrims get a lot of play. But Jamestown was first by 13 years in 1607. It's the first English colony, permanent English colony in the Americas. Obviously, it's not the first American colony. We'll get to that. We already learned about that, St. Augustine, right? Which almost, 60 years earlier. But now we're English are coming, and look out. Okay. You ready, Connor? How you doing? Oh, you born ready?
Yeah,
all right,
born
there
ready.
you go. All right.
Just for this exercise, just for this chapter, I'm born ready for it.
All right, buddy. I know
This is
you.
what
I
I'm
know
made
you're
for.
pumped. All right. Chapter 4. English settlers come to stay. In Virginia, April is a sweet month. Strawberries and white dogwoods blossom below the green of tall pines. Red buds are emerging, and so are grape leaves, honeysuckle, and wild roses. It was thus, in April of 1607, when three small ships landed at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The ships were the Susan Constant, the Discovery, and the Godspeed. They had been sent from England by a business corporation called the London Company. They were the same three ships that left the docks in the River Thames. The voyagers had been told to look for gold in the river of passage that would go through the country to China and Japan. They were also to see if there were other ways to make money on this unknown continent. The ships anchored near an elbow of beach they named Cape Henry in honor of young Henry, the king's oldest son. Some of the mariners rowed ashore and set out exploring. We could find nothing worth the speaking of, but fair meadows and goodly tall trees, with such fresh waters running through the woods as I was almost ravished at the first sight thereof, wrote George Percy, who was one of the gentlemen adventurers. On their way back to the ship, the Englishmen were attacked by Indians, who came creeping upon all fours, like bears, with their bows in their mouths. But when they felt the sharpness of our shot, they retired into the woods with a great noise. So in other words, they were attacked by guns. When they felt the great shot, that means the gun.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Indians retreated. The local Indians knew about white men, and they didn't want them around. Spain, England's old enemy, had tried to start 2 colonies in the Chesapeake Bay area. An Indian prince from the region had been taken to Spain, baptized a Christian, educated, and returned to his people. That prince had far more schooling than most of the Englishmen who now wished to invade his land. The Englishmen didn't seem to know any of that. They thought of Indians as savages. So what that means is one of the Native Americans actually went to college in Spain and was fully educated and aware of the white man from Europe. And still the English thought they were superior, even though he had more schooling. The Englishmen spent a few weeks exploring the Bay Area. They feasted on strawberries, 4 times bigger and better than ours in England. Ate oysters, you must be psyched about that, Con, which were very large and delicate in taste. And noticed grapevines, in bigness as a man's thigh. The oysters and mussels lay on the ground as thick as stones. We opened some, and found in many of them pearls. As for sturgeon, there were so many of these fish, all the world cannot be compared to it. They planted a cross at Cape Henry, thanked God for the safe voyage, and watched as Captain Newport opened a sealed metal box. The box had been entrusted to him by the London Company. Newport would soon sail back to England. He opened the box and read 6 names and his own. They were to be members of a council and elect a president. One of the names was a surprise. It was John Smith. He was locked up in the ship's belly. Smith was of yeoman stock and feisty. He was not one of the gentlemen. He had angered some of those gentlemen, and they had put him in chains. They were planning to send him back to England. Now they would have to work with him. So what that means is a couple of things. So John Smith was put in prison, and now he was going to be one of the people who was running the colony. So that was an oops by them. Also a yeoman. It has a definition in yellow on the page, but a yeoman is a small farmer who cultivates his own land. All right, so in other words, he actually owned a house. He didn't own a big house where he could make a lot of money on, but he actually owned a house big enough that he could grow his own food on. So that's a yeoman. It's kind of what America is now, a bunch of middle class. So he wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich either. Okay, go ahead. The instructions in the box said they were to go inland up a river and find a suitable place for their colony. So they left the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and sailed up a river they called the James to a site they named Jamestown. Several men, including John Smith and Christopher Newport, went on up the James River in search of a passage to China. They had no idea the size of the country. When they saw the breaking waves, they were sure they had found the western coast and the Pacific Ocean. John Smith wrote in his log of the ocean ahead. They soon discovered that the waves were caused by water tumbling over rapids in the river. They were at a site that would someday be the city of Richmond. The river would not let them go farther. All those Jameses, the James River and Jamestown, were named to honor the new king, James I. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, still unmarried and childless, her cousin James was brought from Scotland to become king of the United Kingdom of Scotland and England. King James had worked out a kind of deal with the Spaniards. It went like this. We English will stop raiding your ships if you Spaniards will promise not to attack our settlers. So, the new settlers weren't as worried about Spanish attackers as they might have been in the 16th century. As it turned out, there may have been Spanish spies among them. But it was gold that was on their mind when they reached Jamestown, and they soon began searching for it. They also built rough huts for shelter and a triangular fort for protection. Jamestown was almost an island with a narrow sandbar link to the mainland. It would be easy to defend against Indian raids or against ships, just in case the Spaniards did decide to come up the river. Besides, deep water touched the land. They could sail right up to the site and tie their ships to the trees. As it turned out, they couldn't have picked a worse spot. The land was swampy. The drinking water was bad. It was hot in summer and bone-chilling in winter. The mosquitoes drove the settlers crazy and carried malaria germs. They might have handled all that if they had been a decent bunch, but for the most part, they were lazy and vain and fought amongst themselves. And their first 2 leaders were incompetent, which means they made a mess of the job. So they are very unlike the Pilgrims and the Puritans. When the Pilgrims come to America, you can say a bunch of stuff about them, mistakes, whatever. They worked their tail off. It was a sin to them to play games and be lazy. They were very hard workers. These guys, not so much. All were men. They brought no woman. Remember, most were gentlemen with no training or taste for hard work. To be fair, they had been misled about the New World. They expected to find gold at their feet, and they wasted valuable time looking for it. And there wasn't a farmer among them. To make things worse, the London company, which had paid for the voyage, showed poor sense. It gave all the colonists salaries and did not allow them to own property. No one had a reason to work hard, because the hard workers got the same pay as those who did nothing. Besides all that, they had bad luck. Lots of bad luck. The worst may have been that they brought some English germs across the sea. One was a typhoid fever germ that killed many of them. Tidewater, Virginia had other germs, especially dysentery germs, that made some sicken and die. The Indians killed still others. Some starved. What happened to those eager men and boys who had stood on London docks in December? Fewer than half of them saw another December. So at first, just like the Pilgrims, they lose half of their people.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Yet the news wasn't all bad, really. This was the first English colony that survived in the New World. A few things had to go right to make that happen. One man, more than any other, helped make things go right. He was short, scrappy, red-bearded John Smith. All right, I saw the Disney movie Pocahontas, and he was not short, nor red-bearded or red-haired. But that's what he really looked like, not the tall blonde guy. All right. He had come to Virginia in chains. He was Jamestown's third president and a born leader, even though many of the voyagers didn't like him. All right, so we're going to learn all about John Smith tomorrow, and man, he's like a superhero almost. He was a real action hero. I mean, he didn't have superpowers or anything, but he was a tough guy. All right, we'll see you. Say goodnight, Connor.
Good night, Connor.